So, welcome to this edition of 22nd Century Management with Ken. I am here today with Patty Civalleri, and we're going to talk about brand building in just a second. For those of you that watched last week's show, I was in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. Today, I'm actually on the beach that's in my office. Next week, I'll be here. Then the week after, I'm going to be back out at sea. But we'll still have a plan on having a show, so we'll see everybody in those at those time frames. Patty is a very interesting person because her background and her, let's say, her forte is writing travel guides. And so, given your background and what you normally write, how did you come up writing a book about building a brand, Patty?
Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you so much, or good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me as your guest today, Ken. Well, how did I get here? Well, I got to travel in a very unusual way because I spent 16 years on the Directors Council of the Coatson Institute of Archaeology at UCLA. So I traveled for 16 years with archaeologists and scientists to the deepest, darkest corners of our earth in search of lost and ancient cultures. And so it's a real Indiana Jones in high heels kind of a period of my life. But that got me really good at two things. One, I was great at seeing history, and two, I was really great at traveling. So I took those two things, and of course, I've been a writer my whole life. So I took those elements together and decided to start writing travel books about some of the places in the world that have really terrific cultural heritage sites. And I started with Italy. But from there, so I've been doing that for several years until COVID, when everybody stopped traveling, which became a real challenge. And the question is, gee, what am I going to do with my time now? But luckily, right about that time, one of my friends, who happened to be the best friend of Joe Coloumbe. Joe Coloumbe was the real Joe, the Trader Joe. Uh, my friend's name was Leroy Watson, and Leroy was the first employee of Joe's way back before it was Trader Joe's. It was called Pronto Markets. And Leroy stayed with Joe all the way through Pronto, all the way through Trader Joe's, and stayed 20 years longer within the Trader Joe's organization, longer than Joe stayed. So Leroy has every deep level, knowledge of the company. But as a partner and best friend of Joe Coloumbe, socially we traveled in the same circles and similar circles. So I had known Joe periodically, again socially, for close to 30 years. One day Joe was moving a couple of years ago, and he was packing up some boxes, and he found this old journal that he had written, kind of a journal, kind of a manuscript, kind of just kind of a bunch of notes put together. And he gave it to Leroy and said, Leroy, do something with this. And Leroy said, okay, Patty, you're in the book business. Do something with this. And that's kind of how things start entrepreneurially, right? And so I thought, well, I will publish the book. But first of all, let me read it. And I read it, and it was love at first read. It was, it was a beautiful story, beautifully done, and it was real insight into Joe's mind. And so I took the manuscript and just edited the heck out of it and cleaned it up and made it pretty and packaged it and gave it to my agent and said, find us a publisher. He found HarperCollins. HarperCollins, we signed a contract with HarperCollins, and as soon as we did that, Joe passed away, which was really deflating at the time because at that point I'd already put a year into it. And I thought, oh, this is awful. I can't do this without Joe. This is his story. But after thinking it through, I thought, well, you know what? It kind of encouraged me really to sort of, rev up the engines. And it became much more important that his voice, his story got out there and didn't get lost after he was gone. So that's how I fit into this story, and that's how this all happened. And it was a really excellent COVID pivot. It's the best ever.
Oh, very nice. So let's talk about Trader Joe, because it's a brand that everybody recognizes, and most people pretty much know what Trader Joe's is. But I'm assuming that it didn't start out where it ended up. So how did it get from You mentioned the name of the store and I didn't remember. I apologize. But how did it get from where it started to where it is today as a brand?
Well, it started when Joe graduated from Stanford. He graduated with an MBA. And his first job out of school is he went to work for an old company way back then called Rexall Drugs. And a lot of us might remember Rexall. But one of the vice presidents of Rexall saw something in Joe and he sort of took him under his wing and said, he gave him an opportunity within the organization that was very unusual. He said, listen, Joe, we've got a budget to open 6 stores, 6 retail stores. We're not quite sure what we want to do with these stores. So we want you, young Joe, to go around the United States and find a model that isn't here in California and one that you think could work here in California. So Joe set out and he went around the country. He got to Texas and he found a store, a model. At the time, we called them variety stores. But he found a variety store model in Texas that he thought, ooh, this could really work in California. And these guys can't come to California because their employee laws don't sync up with, California employee laws. So he said, it looks like I'm pretty free and clear. So he goes back to Rexall. They call these stores Pronto Markets, Pronto as in, get it now.
Yeah.
And they opened a series of 6 little variety stores. And that's how that started. And that's where Joe really cut his teeth on personally growing the organization. Now, when they started, Joe got 49% of Pronto. And of course, Rexall kept 51%. So Joe is growing these stores. He opened all 6 stores. He opened a 7th store, which was his own. He owned 100% of the 7th Pronto Market. And at that point, he went back to Rexall and said, "Hey guys, tell you what, why don't you let me buy your 51% at market value?" And they basically, the vice president of Rexall put his telephone call on hold and said, "Okay, Joe, if you can go 10 points over book, it's yours." Joe thought, wow, that's really great news, but I don't have any money. What do I do now? How do I get money? Well, Joe at that point had fostered an extreme loyalty in his employees. And so, and also in his vendors. So what he did is he went to his vendors and he said, Ador Farms, can you loan me? I'll tell you what, you've been trying to get my business. If I give you all my dairy business, will you give me a loan to help me fund this, help me buy out Rexall in these business, in their shares? And he got his employees to also buy in, and he got enough money to be able to buy those 6 stores. So he then grew Pronto Markets, and he's trying everything. He's trying bullets. He's trying nudie magazines. He's trying all kinds of things, figuring out what's going to work, what's not going to work. He got up to 16 stores, and he got some really bad news. He heard that this company in Texas was coming to California. And he thought, holy mackerel, these guys have a national budget and I've got 16 puny little stores. They're going to run over me like a steamroller. And he thought, there's zero way in the world we can compete with them. So he grabbed his wife and kids in a panic weekend, basically, took them up to the mountains in California and said, am I going to close on Monday morning? I don't know what to do. But while he was up there, he started envisioning all these thoughts. He was drinking these Trader Vic's, what were those drinks back then with the umbrellas and Mai Tais?
Oh,
and he was drinking Trader Vic's Mai Tais. And he started thinking about, an old movie that he saw where these trading ships were going from port to port, trading food, rare and unusual and exotic foods. And he thought about this Disneyland Pirates of the Caribbean ride that he took, at Disney. And these all sort of mushed together. And he got this concept of this Trader Joe's concept. It all sort of mushed together. He comes running back off the mountain. He said, guys, we're not going to close on Monday. We're going to change everything. We're going to change our name to Trader Joe's. We're going to change our theme to a Pacific trading ship oriented theme. We're going to wear flowered shirts, and we're just going to be something like nobody's ever seen before. So that's how that started. And it was kind of a crisis moment for Joe, but he got through it.
And I think all of us that have owned our own business at some time have been in a situation where we had to deal with crisis like that. I don't know, I know I've dealt with those kinds of things, but I was never as creative as he was about figuring out this Trader Joe's concept. Now, one of the things that I see, and I work in in the office equipment space a lot, but just with businesses in general, I see a lot of businesses that have built companies, but I don't know that you could really say they've built a brand. We think of a good example, and I'll pick a brand that everybody automatically thinks of. If you wanted somebody to give you a tissue, what would you ask for?
Kleenex, right?
You'd ask for Kleenex.
Sure.
You want a copy, you'd want a Xerox. You give me a Xerox, make me a Xerox. So we see some of these brands that are so well known. And Trader Joe's is a brand like that. You say Trader Joe's, almost everybody knows who Trader Joe's is.
Right.
So the question is how does a company that may have a business, how do they really work on polishing it up so that it becomes a brand?
Oh boy, that's a big question, and it's a great question. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs, so this is family dinner fodder my whole life. Basically, Joe had something that drove him. He felt different from everybody else, and it started with his being left-handed. He felt that left-handers think differently than everybody else in the world. Now, back in the 60s, you weren't really allowed to be left-handed, and it was kind of squelched if you were left-handed. So left-handers were really a minority back then. But one of the things that he was absolutely convinced of was that left-handers saw the world differently, just slightly differently than the rest of the world. And he didn't figure it would be fair to ask people if they were left-handed during their interviews, but he would do things during interviews like he'd ask them a question and ask them to write down the answer. And if they would write left-handed, it would just like, they would go up one little notch in his book. But what he did is ultimately he had hired left-handers in a number of different key positions in the organization very, very early on. And so he liked people that saw the world differently. He wanted people that would question him, that would challenge him. He didn't want anybody that would kowtow to him. He wanted people that would buy into his concept, he really fostered loyalty and fairness. So to begin with, he saw himself differently, and therefore he saw his business differently, and he wanted it structured differently. So that was kind of at the beginning level psychologically of where he was coming from. Points of differentiation were huge to Joe. In fact, he got pretty obsessive about differentiating. He got to the point where he didn't want to carry anything that you could get around the corner at the grocery store. But how do you do that? What do you do when your customers want milk? They don't want to have to get all these neat things from you and then still have to go to the grocery store, right? When they want bread, when they want eggs. So he challenged himself to find the answer to how to differentiate at every level on the shelf. And boy, it was really amazing. So he kind of came up with his list of differentiators. Like one of them is price. The obvious way of differentiating is price. Now he knew that he was a small company, so he didn't need to charge as much as the big grocery stores. But he also didn't want to be perceived as the 99-cent store guy. He didn't want to be, the cut rate, cheap food, bad quality store market guy. So again, he needed to find ways to differentiate. Now, one of the things he did early, and this is something that is highly recommended to every entrepreneur, and that is when you try to sing to the world, your voice can't be heard. There's just too much noise out there, too much competition, too much noise. But when you try to focus on one single market and you get really good at that market, suddenly that market, which could be millions of people, that market becomes your voice and they start singing for you. And that's how the beginning of a brand is built. You cannot say, well, I should carry this or I should carry that because I don't want to leave this guy out and leave that guy out. Leave him out. Joe's market that he identified, he called them very specifically the overeducated, underpaid. The people that were overeducated and underpaid, which we now know as sort of, at the time, that was the burgeoning middle class. But he identified that market as people that had an education. Being educated, they traveled a little bit more. They wanted a little bit more in their life. They wanted a little bit better food. They wanted, they had higher requests than you can typically find in a normal grocery store. So that was his market. And he saw that as a growing market for a number of reasons. He saw, Boeing come out with the 747, which dropped the price of travel. When people start traveling, it opens your mind, it opens your taste, it opens everything in your world, right? So there was a number of reasons why he felt that was his market. He didn't care about kids. He didn't care about whatever. He wanted the overeducated, underpaid. So given that, how do you differentiate and speak only to that market, that key? And you just got to stop me here because I can go on forever.
No, we're fine. Let's go.
Okay, so obviously the first way is price. The second way of differentiating is packaging, quantity and packaging, right? You can have, at the time they were selling rice in 50-pound bags, and he thought, well, what if you could sell rice in 1-pound bags or boxes? Those are obvious ways of differentiating. People will come to you now, to buy the rice instead of buying the 50-pound bags, especially if they're living in apartments, which at the time apartments were exploding. So people didn't have the space to store large bags of rice or flour or sugar or things like that. An example was eggs. His customers kept saying, Joe, we need you to carry eggs. And Joe, being the Joe he was, he would think to himself, but I can't carry eggs because everybody else carries eggs. How can I differentiate eggs? I can't find square eggs. Chickens aren't going to lay me special eggs. But Joe did his research and he found a farmer that had different eggs. Lo and behold, the eggs and dairy products were regulated back then. And Joe found a particular kind of egg that wasn't regulated. And it was regulated based on its size. See, the grocery stores at the time all carried what we call now medium eggs. And they all sold them by the dozen at the same price. They were regulated. Joe says he found these extra large eggs and the extra large egg world didn't have enough eggs to supply the whole grocery world. So he was in Fat City. He felt, well, I could carry extra large eggs. And he realized he can carry them and sell them for less than what the grocery stores were selling medium eggs for. Perfect differentiators. So you really got way more bang for your buck. You got bigger eggs. And that was a way that Joe could differentiate even eggs. Health benefits. Joe would differentiate based on health benefits. For instance, vanilla extract with no alcohol, low sodium baking soda, these kinds of things. Another way you can differentiate. Deodorants with no aluminum. He was finding different ways to differentiate based on health. In the 1970s, the whole health industry was just starting to blossom. The whole hippy dippy thing kind of brought that into focus. Joe went through his whole hippy dippy phase where, he wore beads and, and tried to grow squash in his backyard and went through that whole thing. Another way was if products had ecological appeal, if they could, maybe later, if they could be recycled, or albacore tuna caught on long lines rather than in nets, things that had ecological benefits. There was the differentiator of rarity or uniqueness. And that was easy because Joe sent his buyers all over the world to find new products, products that people couldn't find, grains, cereals, breads, all kinds of healthy, wonderful things, beers from all over the world, that would differentiate him. But at the time, one of the things that his overeducated and underpaid market really hitting him hard for were wines. Now, wines at the time, the grocery stores would carry, two or three or four labels of wine. The wine industry was very regulated at the time. And Joe thought, he wasn't even allowed to, if he brought wine in from Oregon or from Washington or from any place else, that was considered importing. And he was not allowed to take states, wine in from other states even. It was so regulated. What he learned was that the importing laws did not include wines from other countries. So Joe sends his buyers out to France, and they go and they find these fabulous Chateau Lafite Rothschild labels, and they bring them back, and they're not regulated. Joe can sell them for any price that he wants, and he's selling them for $10. You can't find those wines now for $10.
Yeah.
But back then, Joe was bringing in these phenomenal European wines and wines from around the world. And boy, he came bursting into the market with over 80 wine labels and he ended up carrying more wine labels than a typical liquor store on the corner would carry. And you know what? One of the things he said in his book is, he found a loophole in the law, and by God, he drove a truck through it. And that was Joe finding openings, doing his homework, doing his research, finding ways to differentiate and not settled for being regulated.
Well, it's interesting. A couple of things that you just said struck home with me, and there are things that I talk about, not to the same level, but with my service managers when I teach class, I talk to them about doing things that adds value to their brand.
Yes.
That be different, do more, because like so many industries in the office equipment industry, everybody wants to see who can be the lowest. And I make this point frequently and publicly about the fact that this race to the bottom, print's going down, the price is going down. It's hard to make a living when you're selling 0 clicks at double o nothing.
You are absolutely right on the money. It isn't about being the lowest. It's about being different. Once you're different, you can have any price you want. And that's the cool thing. And I think that's a phenomenal secret.
Yeah, I love that, and I partnered with another gentleman. We teach people to sell a different billing model that again lets them stop running to the bottom, because it's. Are you familiar with Seth Godin's Purple Cow?
Yes.
And we talk about that on our other show a lot about the purple cow, because if you're the only person with a purple cow, whatever you charge is the lowest price for a purple cow.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And Joe did that. There's some really great stories that are really terrific. Joe, his customers wanted cheese, and again, the dairy industry was very heavily regulated, and he didn't want to carry cheddar cheese and Jack cheese and Swiss cheese like everybody else did. He had to find a way to differentiate. So, two stories that come to mind, really quickie little vignettes, would be. One time he sent his buyer, well, actually it was Leroy Watson, my friend, who got me into all this. He sent Leroy to Europe to go find some cheese, because it was kind of the same thing with cheese that he learned with alcohol. If it was American cheese, the American cheese industry could regulate it, but it was foreign cheese, they couldn't. So Leroy goes to Europe, and he brings back this cheese, and it turns out it's an amazing thing. And he actually sold this cheese for less than what the grocery stores were selling Velveeta, and it has now become one of America's favorite cheeses. It's called Brie, right?
Huh.
Brie cheese. So when they first brought Brie cheese, they were able to sell it for less than what the grocery stores were selling Velveeta cheese for. Which is a highly processed cheese. Another story is customers wanted Swiss cheese, and Joe's like, Swiss cheese with holes in it. Everybody's got it. How can I do that differently? He's thinking, okay, Leroy, go back to Wisconsin or someplace and go find me something about Swiss cheese that we can do differently. And Leroy watched this guy in this big vat cooking this big vat of, I mean, I picture it sort of like a big witch's brew, stirring the big vat of melty cheese. And the heat in the bottom is centered underneath the pot. So the bubbles are coming up in the middle. And the guy he would scoop out uh, the middle section, and he would put it in cooling bricks, and so that the cheese would cool before the bubbles could escape the cheese. And but he would take all the cheese from around the edge that had no bubbles, and he'd put it in a big pile. And and Leroy said, "Well, what do you do? Is there something wrong with that cheese?" And the guy says, "No, nothing wrong with it. It's the same cheese." And Leroy said, "Well, what do you do with it?" He says, "Oh, we sell it as second level cheese because it doesn't have bubbles in it. People want holes in their Swiss cheese, so we sell it to schools." And Leroy said, "But there's nothing wrong with it." And the guy says, "No, it's perfectly exactly the same cheese." Leroy said, "Can we have it?" So they load up the trains and they ship all this, Swiss cheese with no bubbles out here, and Trader Joe's packages it under Closed Eye Baby Swiss, and it's sold like hotcakes. It's sold like hotcakes. At Closed Eye Baby Swiss, and it was just a question of doing something a little bit different. But at the shelf level, if you think of every product, or if you're in the service business and not in think of how you can differentiate your service. What can you add? How can you see it differently? How can you tweak what you do to be just a little bit different than what everybody else offers? That is how you build a brand. That's how you build a brand.
Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my other point that I really loved, because again, it's something that I preach to in my classes, and that was finding out what your customers want. I borrowed this concept from Carl Sewell, who wrote the book Customers for Life. It's an amazing book, and for those out there that haven't read it, he's the most successful luxury car dealer probably in the world. And he did some things that were very different. But one of the things he talked about doing, and I call it the reverse lunch and learn, because a lot of times, in the office equipment space, they'll have a lunch and learn where they'll bring customers in to show them new products,
right?
And they'll feed them lunch. And I said, do it the other way. Bring the customers in, feed them lunch, and ask them how your business could be better.
Mm-hmm.
Ask them what other pain points they have that you could help them with. Because I think that way too many times in service businesses in general, but I think in a lot of businesses, people never take time to really ask. And
Sorry.
that's okay. It happens to me too. But too many times companies don't take the time to really try to understand exactly what their customers want. And I think if you get the customers, and this is an example of something I picked up from what you said about Trader Joe, was the fact that he learned what his customers wanted, and then he found out a way to provide it. Rather than trying to make them buy what he felt like selling, he found ways to sell what his customers felt like buying. And that is a very different way of doing things.
That's really interesting, and he did that. And because he worked in the stores every day, he was in constant contact with, face to face with his customers every day. So they were always telling him what they wanted, and they were always dissatisfied or less than satisfied with what they were getting from the grocer. And again, he really focused on that market that wanted things differently. They wanted a bigger world and so forth. But one of the things he did behind the scenes was buyers. If you take a look at buyers in most organizations, buyers are an administrative position. They fill out order forms. They, and they handle the ordering and the shipping and the logistics of moving product from A to B. Joe saw that differently. Joe saw that it was, he put the buying into the hands of his buyers, the product selection. So, and he sent his buyers, he didn't keep them behind the desk. He sent them out into the world. Go to France, go to Germany, go to Japan, go to South America, fine foods, fine grains, fine cereals, fine things to satisfy our overeducated and underpaid customer base. Find new things for them. We will bring them back. We will test them on our end caps. We will do all kinds of things and find out if our customers like this kind of thing, or if they want something different, or if it reminds them of something else they've had. But you guys need to actually be buyers, not administrators, and not just order takers. And that's something that he did that was really different. And even today, buyers aren't truly buyers; they are order takers, and it's a real different perspective. But it put his products much closer to the face of the store, the front of the store, at shelf level, and which is really wonderful. So with buyers constantly traversing the world, they're always finding new products, new deals, new ways to, seasonal things, farm grown local items, things that the administrative way of buying and ordering, it can't accommodate that level of product rotation and satisfaction. It just can't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because they weren't clerks, which in a lot of cases, the people that are placing orders are really just glorified clerks.
You're right.
But they were explorers.
Yes.
And I love that thought too about going out and exploring. And again, that ties in with what I try to build into my service managers is find out what people want, find ways to provide it.
Yes.
If you can provide it and do it in a way that's profitable, it doesn't matter that nobody else in our industry does it, because now you have something that makes you different. And
You're right. You're right on. And some of the things he did is he wanted to have sort of a private communication between he and his educated buyers, and he did that through individual product names. Like, he wanted to give his product names that really his educated people would really get, and most other people wouldn't even notice, right? So, like Sir Isaac Newton's, the Brandenburg, concerto cookies, or I made some notes here. Trader Darwin's vitamins, right? Only the strong survive. He had Trader Gainsborough's blueberry syrup. I mean, how many uneducated people know Gainsborough and know what a blue boy is? And so for Joe, that was like his little secret code to his defined marketplace. And it was a level of communication, and his customers loved it. They absolutely loved it. But there was also something else that Joe did, which everybody knows about, but I don't know if they think about what went behind that. And that's Joe's private labeling. Now, so if you notice, most everything in the store is now branded with the Trader Joe's brand label on it.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because he didn't want competitors to catch up with them. He didn't want them to know who his vendors were. If a competitor knows who your vendors were, they could easily figure out what your ingredients are and then how much things cost and so forth, right? But when you private label something and you just tweak the ingredients a little bit here or a little bit there, or change out this kind of, canola oil for safflower oil or whatever you're doing, your competitors have no idea who your vendors are. They have no idea how much it costs. They don't know what your ingredients are. And they have no idea what your pricing should be. Again, you've differentiated yourself, and you can hide a myriad of secrets behind private labeling. Again, another way that Trader Joe's has put their brand out there very, very strongly on every single product just about in the store.
Well, and there's another piece that I love about it is the concept of private labeling. Even if everybody knew exactly what you're doing, okay, if they knew everything, the fact that it had a Trader Joe's label. So you can't go to the local grocery store and buy Trader Joe's cheese.
Right.
You can't buy Trader Joe's cereal. You can't buy. So the brand itself then stands alone, and you have no competition with that. Now, sure, maybe it's oatmeal, and they can go to the grocery store and buy oatmeal, but they can't get Trader Joe's oatmeal.
Right.
And so when you build the brand loyalty, then people, a good example, and we'll look at somebody else that's done a good job of that in their niche, is Starbucks coffee.
Mhm.
Now you can go to the grocery store and buy Starbucks coffee, but if you're a Starbucks coffee fan, that's just a convenience to you.
Right.
But people pay a lot more for Starbucks coffee than they would pay for, Maxwell House or some other
Right.
brand.
Absolutely.
And so you build loyalty to the brand and you deliver a quality product. The fact that you have your brand on it, again, like you said, makes it a differentiator. It's something nobody else has.
Right. And that when you put your brand and your label on every single product like they did, I mean, it really bolsters the strength of your product perceptually in the eyes of the customer, and it gives you that strength of that power that you need when you're going up against all these mega billion-dollar grocery companies and competitors, whatever your business is. So finding ways to bolster your brand, putting it everywhere. When people start seeing a brand and they start seeing it everywhere, they just start it just builds in their mind. It builds over time. Every time
Mm-hmm.
they see it on a bus, they see it on a bus stop, they see it online, whatever. Every time they see your brand, it's just building one more little brick towards this powerhouse that you're trying to do as an entrepreneur. So it's getting your name, your label, your logo, your brand out there and associating it with something that people are envious about. You know, he started with the overeducated, underpaid, but guess what? Everybody in the world now wants to be fed like that. Everybody, whether you're overeducated and underpaid or undereducated and underpaid, whatever you are, you still want to be fed like Trader Joe's people, right? So now you've got everybody, and they've created a position of envy in the market that they never really went for before. So it's if you can do that brick by brick with your brand name and just keep getting it out there, keep getting it seen, keep getting it known, it happens over time. And stay consistent and don't give up. I mean, these are find ways to bolster that brand. And Joe was like the most clever guy at doing that.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because that takes me back to another book. When I first started my company, because I started in the copier industry, owning a dealership, and I didn't know anything about owning a dealership, so I had to learn and study, and it was my first real business. So one of the other books that I read, and everybody in the marketing world knows it now, but it was J. Conrad Levinson's Guerrilla Marketing. And he makes that point about get your name in front and be consistent.
Yes.
Because one of the challenges that companies do is they'll do a little of this and a little of that, and so it starts to confuse people because they don't know really what the brand stands for, what the brand looks like. I have that conversation with service managers about when your employees walk in, they should be a specific process they go through. I said, if nothing else, take their business card, laminate a picture on it, and make it into a badge so that when they walk in the door, they recognize you. And it's interesting how the impact of that, because when I was in El Paso, I had a very small company. I had 2 vehicles, but my company's name was Call Ken. Okay.
Okay,
And
sure.
that in and of itself, that was a little bit of J. Conrad Levinson's, thinking was, it's okay. That raised a question in everybody's mind. Why do you call Ken? And my logo was a little guy holding a phone saying Ken. And I would have people say, we see your trucks all over town. I had 2 trucks. El Paso was a big city. But we see your truck because it's stuck in people's minds.
Right.
But it was consistent. My color on my sign, my color on my vehicles, all of those kinds of things were consistent to try to convey that this is the brand.
Right.
And, I like I said, Trader Joe's is a great example of that. There are other companies that do it very well. But I think that that's, again, one of those things that a lot of companies miss is that consistency. In guerrilla marketing made the point, that if you talk about this one day and this another day and this, you keep talking about different things, all you've done is confuse your customers. So you should have a marketing message that is consistent and drives the same point home. Doesn't mean that you're selling the same product, but your theme needs to stay the same so that you attract that perfect customer. For example, like he mentioned, um, I would. It is a shame that I never had a chance to meet or talk with him, because I think I would have had some. I would have loved it. One of the things I love about doing this is I get to talk to fascinating people, and I get to learn things, and I have some amazing conversations. And people like Joe are the kinds of people I like to talk to. Somebody that's way smarter than I am, that can share, give me one little new idea, to make yourself a little bit different, and become better branded.
One time, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I attended a funeral for one of our local Trader Joe's wine buyers who I had gotten to be friends with in my neighborhood. And I went to his funeral and I sat next to Joe. And this was a Japanese Buddhist temple funeral. And I don't know if you've ever been to a Japanese Buddhist temple funeral, but they last 4 or 5 hours. And you're sitting on this hard pew for 4 or 5 hours in an afternoon. And Joe was really interesting. Joe, something that people didn't know about him, and he doesn't talk much about in the book, but Joe was really into the arts. And he had brought a sketch pad with him. And he sat next to me, and we whispered and chortled for 5 hours. But as we talked and we laughed and we giggled quietly, I was watching what he was drawing, and he was drawing the altar of this temple, just piece by piece, laying it down, layer upon layer. So by the end of the afternoon, he had this beautiful, um, rendition of the altar. But we had a conversation about that, about how important the arts were to him. And one of the things is he said that he was a visualizer. So visualizers, artists typically are visualizers. That's kind of goes with the personality. And one of the things he was supporting, his wife was very big in opera, and she started the Los Angeles Opera League. Well, the way Joe supported her and connected with the community was one more way to put his brand out there. He was he figured, well, the Opera League can't afford, back when they were young, they couldn't afford to put out flyers and send them out to everybody in the community. So he would put their performance schedule, he would have them printed on the backside of the bag, the Trader Joe's bag. So when you went to Trader Joe's, you bagged your groceries. On the backside of the bag was the opera schedule. And he did that because it cost him no more, because he was already paying for printing on bags. And bags are printed flat. So why not? And it supported his wife, it supported the arts, it supported the community. It just, again, it adhered him in one more way, and adhered and endeared him to the community just one more way. And he was that guy. I would see him tell a story, and he would always look up, and I could see these. Did you ever see the movie The Queen's Gambit, about the chess player, the gal who was the chess player?
No,
What she would do, they depicted really well in the movie that she would see a chessboard up on the ceiling of the roof, and she would see all these plays, and it would just come to her, and she would win. She would solve the problem that she was trying to solve on the chessboard. Joe was like that. He had that visual ability in his head to sort of see a problem and scrunch all this stuff. And he was well read, he was super well informed, but he would scrunch the data in his head and just pull it out, and they would form pieces, like when they combined to form the image of Trader Joe's in his head. you know he was a marvelous human being, deep booming voice, a very quick, ready smile, sparkling eyes. I mean, what a lovely human being. And when I read his manuscript, I thought, whoa, the world is going to love this book. And you know what, Ken? The world has been loving this book. I couldn't be more pleased. Um, I'm going to show you a cover of the book, but it's got all my little sticky notes in it.
that's
But
okay.
this is his book. It's called Becoming Trader Joe, and it is the true founding story of the company. And what I after Joe was gone, when I got into the project, I was counting on Joe for a lot of support, marketing wise, and putting the book out there. when he passed away, I thought, oh my God, I'm all alone in this, and I'm not Joe. Who's going to want to talk to me? Uh, the world has just really come to, the LA Times, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal did two beautiful write-ups. New Yorker Magazine, Inc. Magazine, Forbes. People have been coming to the rescue of this book in huge, huge, abundant ways, and I couldn't be more pleased. And it's kept it on the darn bestseller list almost the entire 6 months that it's been out. So
Huh?
yeah,
Very
it's
nice.
a terrific read. It's a really fun read too. It's one you can relate to.
Okay, well, I'll have to put it on my to read list. We will put a link to the book and to Patty's contact information
Thank
so
you.
that you can find out more. So we'll put that in the show notes on the audio version of the podcast. It'll be in the descriptions on the videos for the podcast, both on LinkedIn, where this show will be forever, and also on my YouTube channel. So that way you can find it. You'll be able to get the book. And for those of you that are thinking about your business, there was a lot of things that Patty shared today that I think have a great deal of value, no matter what your business is. I want to go back to one thing you said at the start that I love too, and I just didn't want to interrupt you at that point in time. Is that he hired people that would stand up to him. They weren't yes men, and I
Yeah,
see so many times that owners of companies want to hire a bunch of people that will say yes sir, yes sir, yes sir, three bags full. And the challenge with that is that it limits the growth of companies.
yeah,
And in fact, one of my current, I won't call it a rant, but one of my current missions is to try to get companies to revisit the way they build their business plan and to get their managers involved in the process. I see companies that are, especially in the entrepreneurial phase, where the owner probably doesn't even have a 5-year plan written out. He doesn't, if he has one, it's in his brain, and he hasn't talked to anybody else about it. So nobody on the team even understands where we're going.
right.
And I think that is such a underutilization of the talent that you should have working for you.
And remember, if people don't know where you're going, how can they help you drive?
That's exactly right, and that's exactly my point. I said it is a topic that I am very passionate about.
I agree. Absolutely.
I appreciate so much you being on the show today, Patty. It has been, I've enjoyed the conversation. You asked what it was going to be like when we talked. I said it's going to be a conversation. We'll talk for a while, but you shared some great insights, some things that are valuable for the audience. And we'll say goodbye to the audience. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next week. Like I said, I'll be on my home office beach next week, and then after that, back traveling for a while. But we'll look forward to it next week.
Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, you're welcome. You've been a great guest.